If you play D&D for any length of time, it's likely that other people in your other social circles will begin to know you play Dungeons & Dragons. A few might see how excited you get when you start talking about Dungeons & Dragons, or just curious enough to ask you something like, well, tell me a little bit more about D&D, or what's the deal with Dungeons & Dragons anyway? What do you say? That's all this week on We Talk D&D. Hello, Griffin family. Welcome back to We Talk D&D. My name is Ryan, and I am your dungeon mentor through your Dungeons & Dragons journey. If you're looking for ideas to inspire you as players and dungeon masters, be sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a single part of the journey. There are two different phases of introducing Dungeons & Dragons to people. First is introducing the idea and concepts of Dungeons & Dragons, and the other is introducing to the game parts of D&D. These seem very similar, but in fact are very, very different in reality. Today, we will cover introducing the idea of Dungeons & Dragons, and next week, we'll cover the introduction of the game portion itself. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on part 2. At its core, Dungeons & Dragons is a role-playing game. In Dungeons & Dragons, you choose what you'd like your character to do, and then the dice will tell you whether or not it worked or not. The dice don't decide what you do like in a board game, where you roll and move a certain number of spaces based on what the die told you to do. With that said, if you have not played a role-playing game before, there's a lot you don't know. Also, when non-players hear role-playing, they have a lot of preconceived ideas that are generally, honestly, not very accurate. When asked, I don't usually have a straightforward answer to what D&D is. I know many people will say that it's a role-playing game with dice, or it's kind of like a board game of sorts, etc. I generally would reply like this. So, what's D&D really? Okay, well, D&D at its heart is a group of friends telling an epic style story together. There are players and a game master, or in D&D we call it a dungeon master. The dungeon master and the players are not playing against one another, it's a cooperative game. Everyone is on the same side, and it's all about the story that ends up happening in each session and through a campaign. The players play a certain character, and the dungeon master is the narrator and acts out all the other parts not played by a player. Honestly, it's probably a little easier for me to give you a feel of the game versus trying to explain it. Are you game for me to give you an example? Sure. Next, my goal is to immerse this person in the setting. I don't say the words role play. The strategy here is to use all 5 senses in describing an opening scene. I usually use the woke up in a jail type trope, but really go into the setting portions of this that we mentioned.
Okay, you're waking up, lying on the floor. You're struck by the high heat in the room. It's stifling. Your head is pounding, and as you reach up, you feel and hear your arm sliding across a rough metal floor. You can physically feel the lump on the back of your head. It's painful and sharp and agonizing. As you begin to sit up, you take in your surroundings. You look down and realize that you're wearing a rag of a tunic. There's a bit of what you assume is your blood smeared on the front of it. You feel a bead of sweat run down your forehead, and you can smell your own body like it's been several days since you last bathed. You look around through the well-used iron bars to the dim torch flame flickering, trying to light the dungeon's room. The large stone blocks that make up the walls and floors look like they've been there for hundreds of years. As you continue to shake the cobwebs from your brain, you make out 7 other freestanding cells just like yours. 6 of the others have figures also beginning to stir as you hear them moaning a bit. You're in the farthest cell from the large, imposing door with iron supports strapped across it. From outside the room, you begin to hear a slow footstep drag, footstep drag. sounds something large coming down towards the door. The figure in the closest cell to the door starts panicking, starts screaming, "No!" Given your headache already, it's awful. The wooden door flies open, banging against the stone wall, and in the doorway stands a large, wolf-like man carrying keys and a homemade club. The prisoner is screaming, "No!" at the top of their lungs. The jailer grabs open the cell door, the metal banging against the cell bars. Forcefully, he grabs the screaming man by the neck and shoulders and starts dragging him out, kicking and screaming all the way. You can hear his heels dragging against the stone as he's pulled away. The wooden door shuts, and you can hear the slow step drags and screaming, step drags, screaming sounds as they soften with the increasing distance. Across from you, you hear a strained voice say, Hey, everyone, we gotta get out of here. That's the second one. I think they're killing us. I think we've got about 30 minutes until he comes back again. Anyone got any ideas? Can anyone see a way out?" What do you do? Just tell me what you're gonna do. If they say something like, "I'd search the cell for a way out," ask them how they would search. Make them give you a little bit more detail. Maybe give them an example like, "I'd use my hands to feel the bars to see if there's any weaknesses." Whatever method they choose, have that work. You're trying to build up feelings of success. Once they are out, tell them they see a small wooden door close to your cell that hasn't been opened yet. The guy in the cell across from you is beckoning you over to let him out. What do you do? By the way, the door is a small cleaning supply closet. There's a mop, an empty bucket, some dried up rags, and an old three-legged stool for them to do whatever it is that they might do with. I roleplay with them through a situation, freeing the others and setting up to attack the guard coming back in. I use the other prisoner that was speaking earlier as a prompter for ideas if they need it, like, "I think if we all got us together, we could jump that guard when he comes back in." Then I have them describe a potential small bit of a battle plan. Now, let's go back to the story. You hear the soft sound at first. Step drag as it's coming closer. You see the faces of the other prisoners. They all look worried and scared, but, ready to go. You can taste the salty sweat coming off your forehead as the anticipation builds. Step drag. Your heart is beating out of your chest. Step drag. The door flies open again, and the creature comes in, and he looks up at you and attack.
I described to them how a few of the hits look based on the plan they made. Now the creature is defeated on the floor, and I asked them, "Now what do you do?" Them thinking about getting the keys and maybe grabbing the club off the body and using that as a weapon and trying to figure out how they escape is where I stop. And then I say to the player, "So, that's kind of what it's like. What do you think?" Give them a chance to reflect a little bit, telling you how that feels, maybe the anticipation or things along those lines. I talk about a few decisions they made, like maybe a skill they used, like lock picking or an investigative check, and the attacks that they did would have involved the dice to introduce an element of luck into the game. Tell them that my job as the game master is to guide you through the mechanics until you know them fairly well. Hey, if you'd like to try it out with the group, we'd be happy to have you over and see if it's something you'd like. Making this an invite and making it not a very big commitment is important, because it's okay if they don't like it and they don't have to feel like they're committed forever. My opinion is getting people to understand the idea of what D&D is the most important thing to hook them into this game we love. I hope you enjoyed it this week. If you did, give it a thumbs up. I really appreciate the support and the comments that you leave. Be sure to subscribe for part 2 as we go introducing the new player to the gamified part of Dungeons and Dragons. We'll see you next week, and as always, good luck out there.